A Navy SEAL walked away from war, believing silence was the safest place left. High in the frozen mountains, he lived alone, until his dog stopped in the snow and refused to move. There was no scream, no signal, only instinct pressing against fate. What began as shelter from a storm became a line between justice and erasure, because some dangers hide behind paperwork, power, and polite smiles. And sometimes God's warning does not come as thunder, but as a loyal dog who knows when it's time to stand. Where are you watching from today? Like the video and subscribe to K9 Navy SEAL Legends for more powerful stories. The blizzard did not arrive loudly. There was no dramatic wall of white rolling over the mountain, no sudden roar to announce its presence. Instead, it settled in the way exhaustion does, quietly, relentlessly, until the world became smaller without anyone noticing when it happened. By the time the storm fully claimed Ashcroft Pass, visibility had collapsed into a narrow tunnel of gray. Pines bent under the weight of wet snow, their branches groaning in low, patient protest. The wind cut sideways, sharp enough to burn exposed skin, carrying ice crystals that stung like thrown sand. On nights like this, the mountain did not care who you were or why you were there. It only cared whether you were prepared. Rowan Pierce was. He lived alone in a weather-beaten log cabin, tucked just inside the tree line, far enough from the road that headlights never touched his windows. At 28, he carried himself with the controlled economy of someone trained to waste nothing, not movement, not breath, not attention. He stood just under 6'1", broad-shouldered without being bulky, his frame lean and solid in a way that suggested discipline rather than vanity. The kind of body built by years of repetition, not mirrors. Inside the cabin, everything had its place. Firewood stacked by size, medical kit checked weekly, radio tuned to the weather band, supplies inventoried like a quiet ritual. Rowan treated survival the way he had once treated missions, not because he expected danger, but because order was easier than memory. He was on medical hold from the Navy SEALs, not discharged, not deployed, suspended in a narrow space between what he had been and what he refused to think about becoming. The doctors called it recovery. Rowan called it waiting. He avoided town, avoided conversation, avoided the subtle pull of human lives intersecting with his own. Solitude wasn't loneliness, it was containment. The fire crackled low behind him as he checked the door latch for the second time. That was when he noticed the silence, not the storm, the absence beneath it. Rowan turned slowly. Mako was standing just inside the open doorway. The German Shepherd was a canine through and through, medium-large, powerfully built without heaviness, muscles compact beneath a thick winter coat of black and tan. His ears were upright and forward, carved into alert triangles. Snow clung to the dark fur along his back and muzzle, melting slowly into darker patches. At 5 years old, Mako moved with the confidence of a dog who knew exactly what his body could do and when not to do it. But now, he wasn't moving at all. Mako's stance was rigid, weight evenly distributed, tail still. His head was angled toward the forest, eyes locked on a point Rowan could not see. The dog's breathing was steady, controlled, but there was tension in his shoulders, subtle, deliberate. This wasn't curiosity, this was recognition. "Easy," Rowan said quietly. Mako didn't respond, didn't flick an ear, didn't glance back for permission. The wind howled harder, pushing snow sideways across the clearing. Rowan followed Mako's line of sight. There was nothing visible beyond the swaying trees and the gray curtain of storm. Rowan felt it then, a tightening low in his chest, familiar and unwelcome. The instinct he had spent months trying to bury stirred awake, stretching its claws. Mako took one step forward, then another. Rowan swore under his breath, pulling on his coat and boots. "You better be right," he muttered, not to the dog, but to the part of himself that still listened. They moved into the storm together. The cold hit like a physical force, stealing breath, numbing fingertips through gloves. Rowan kept one hand near Mako's collar as they pushed through knee-deep snow, following a faint disturbance in the otherwise untouched ground. Footprints, uneven, shallow, dragging, human. They found her less than 50 yards into the trees. She was hunched forward, gripping the handle of a small rolling suitcase that had long since stopped rolling. One wheel was snapped clean off, the frame dragging through the snow behind her. The woman herself looked impossibly fragile against the storm, wrapped in a heavy wool coat that had darkened with moisture. Her shoulders shook, not from sobbing, but from the effort of staying upright. She was old, early 70s, Rowan guessed, short, with a narrow frame that suggested she had once been wiry rather than delicate. Her silver hair was pulled back into a loose knot at the base of her neck, strands plastered to her temples by melting snow. Her skin was pale, weathered, but not soft. This was a face that had known work and stubbornness and endurance. She did not scream when she saw them. She straightened as much as she could, lifting her chin with a dignity that felt deliberate. Her eyes, grey and sharp despite the cold, flicked first to Rowan, then to Mako. "I'm not lost," she said, voice thin but steady. "I just need shelter." Rowan studied her carefully. Hypothermia showed itself in stages: confusion, slurred speech, panic. She showed none of those. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lorraine Whitaker," she replied without hesitation. "I need to get out of this wind for a little while, that's all." The suitcase tipped as the wind shoved it sideways. Lorraine tightened her grip, knuckles white. Rowan hesitated. This was exactly the situation he avoided. A decision with no clean exit. If he took her in, he invited questions, obligations, consequences. If he turned away... Mako moved then. The dog stepped forward and positioned himself squarely between Rowan and the woman, body angled into the wind so it struck him first.
He did not bare his teeth, did not growl. He simply stood there, solid, immovable. Then Mako turned his head and looked back at Rowan, not pleading, expectant. The moment stretched. A sudden gust tore through the trees,
nearly knocking Lorraine off her feet. She stumbled, and without command, Mako shifted, bracing her leg with his body just enough to keep her upright. Rowan felt something cold slide down his spine, not fear, but recognition. The dog hadn't reacted to weakness. He had reacted to timing, as if this moment, this woman, arriving here in this storm, was something he had been waiting for. Rowan exhaled slowly. "All right," he said. He turned back toward the cabin, one hand steadying Lorraine's elbow. She did not thank him. She did not apologize. She simply followed, step by careful step, as if she had already decided that turning back was no longer an option. Inside, warmth rushed to meet them. The fire snapped louder as cold air flooded the room, then settled. Rowan closed the door and slid the bolt into place with a finality that echoed louder than it should have. Lorraine's shoulders sagged the moment the wind was shut out. She remained standing, though, eyes scanning the cabin. Not like someone assessing comfort, but like someone cataloging safety. Rowan guided her to a chair near the fire and draped a thick blanket around her shoulders. His movements were efficient, respectful, no unnecessary touch. Mako took position by the door, lowering himself to the floor with his back against it. His ears stayed up. Lorraine watched him for a moment, something unreadable crossing her face. "He's trained," she said quietly. "Yes," Rowan replied. "He listens," she added. Not a question. "He does," Rowan said again. She nodded once, as if confirming a theory. "That's good." Rowan set a mug of warm water in her hands. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from delayed cold. For a long moment, none of them spoke. The storm raged on outside, indifferent. The fire held. Mako watched the door. Rowan stood there, aware of the line he had crossed and the fact that, somehow, it had already erased itself behind him. He had opened the door, and the mountain, patient as ever, had taken note. The cabin warmed slowly, the way frozen things always did, unevenly, reluctantly, as if heat was something that had to be earned. Rowan moved with quiet precision. He poured warm water into a chipped ceramic mug, testing the temperature against his wrist before handing it to Lorraine. He layered a second blanket over her shoulders, not too tight, careful not to trap moisture. Hypothermia wasn't dramatic, it was procedural, and so was recovery. Lorraine sat upright in the wooden chair near the stove, her posture stiff with pride rather than cold. Up close, Rowan could see the fine lines around her mouth, the kind etched by years of restraint rather than laughter. Her hands were thin, veins pronounced, skin roughened from work that had never been gentle. When she wrapped her fingers around the mug, they shook once, then steadied. "Thank you," she said simply. Rowan nodded. He didn't ask questions yet. Questions came later, after breathing slowed and color returned. Mako lay down near her feet, close enough that his shoulder brushed the leg of the chair. His ears remained upright. Every few minutes, his gaze flicked toward the back door, then the windows, then back to Lorraine. It wasn't anxiety, it was calibration. Rowan noticed. "I won't stay long," Lorraine said after a moment. Her voice had strength in it now, thin but controlled. "Just until the storm eases." "That depends on the storm," Rowan replied. A corner of her mouth twitched. "I used to say things like that." Rowan glanced up. "Used to?" She held the mug closer, as if drawing warmth from more than the water. "I worked for Ashcroft Utilities, accounting, 23 years." The name settled into the room like a dropped tool. Ashcroft Utilities wasn't just a company, it was the company, the one that controlled the underground heating lines that kept the town alive in winter, the water rights that fed half the valley, the permits no one questioned because questioning them meant freezing pipes and dry taps. "You retired?" Rowan asked. "No," Lorraine said. "I was removed," she explained without embellishment. "Internal audits, safety reviews, emergency notices. Her house, small, paid off, inherited from her parents, sat above a secondary heating line. A risk, they said. Temporary evacuation, they said. Papers arrived with signatures she recognized and numbers she didn't. By the time she understood what had changed, the locks were scheduled to be replaced. Everything was legal, she said quietly. Just not reasonable." Rowan listened without interrupting. He had learned long ago that people didn't need help to tell the truth. They needed permission. Mako rose suddenly and walked toward the back door, nose low to the floor. He paused, sniffed the frame, then circled once before returning to Lorraine's side. "He does that a lot?" Rowan asked. Lorraine followed Mako with her eyes. "Only when something doesn't belong." That night passed without incident, though Rowan slept lightly, back to the wall, counting the wind in measured breaths. Mako remained at the door, alert but silent. By morning, the storm had thinned into a brittle quiet. Snow lay heavy and smooth across the clearing, untouched except for their tracks from the night before. Rowan loaded the truck. Supplies were low, and Lorraine's cough had returned, dry, persistent. Town was unavoidable. Ashcroft Pass looked almost gentle in daylight. Smoke rose straight from chimneys. Icicles glittered along roof lines. It was the kind of beauty that made people forget how quickly it could kill you. At the pharmacy, Rowan stayed near the counter while Lorraine spoke with the clerk. That was when the man approached. He was tall, mid-30s, clean-cut in a way that suggested deliberate effort. His hair was light brown, trimmed close at the sides, beard neatly shaped along a sharp jawline. He wore a dark wool coat that didn't quite belong to winter work and smiled as if he had practiced it in mirrors. "Lorraine Whitaker," he said warmly. "We've been worried." Lorraine stiffened. "Brennan Sloan," he continued, offering his hand. "Community liaison." She didn't take it. "I don't live in the community anymore," she said. Brennan's smile didn't falter. His eyes slid briefly to Rowan, then to Mako, who had stepped forward without sound. The dog positioned himself between Rowan and Brennan, body still, head slightly raised. Brennan noticed. He hesitated, just a fraction, then stepped back half a pace. "Well," he said lightly, "if you need anything, we just want everyone safe." Rowan met his gaze. "We're fine." Brennan nodded, already retreating. Of course. Enjoy your day. Outside, Lorraine exhaled shakily. They don't usually look, she murmured. They wait. The drive back to the cabin was silent. Snow muffled everything, even thought. When they arrived, Mako went straight to the fence line. He dug once, twice, then stopped and looked back at Rowan. Rowan fetched a shovel. Buried just beneath the snow was a small black device, magnetized, no larger than a deck of cards. Rowan wrapped it in cloth, jaw tight. That night, as the wind rose again, Rowan sat by the fire and stared at the device in his hands. This wasn't coincidence. Lorraine watched him from her chair, eyes tired but steady. I didn't come here on purpose, she said. But they followed me anyway. Rowan nodded slowly. Some lines, once crossed, erased themselves. The morning after the tracker was found, the mountain felt altered, not quieter, not louder, but watchful. Rowan noticed it in the way sound carried differently through the trees, how even the wind seemed to hesitate before committing to a direction. Snow still blanketed the ground, smooth and deceptive, but certain patches had settled too evenly, as if disturbed and corrected by hands that didn't want to leave evidence. Mako noticed it sooner. The German shepherd paced the edge of the clearing in a tight, deliberate arc, nose low, breath steady. His gait was controlled, disciplined, but his focus had sharpened into something narrow and insistent. He stopped twice, glanced back at Rowan, then continued toward the northeast slope, away from the cabin, away from the road, toward the old ranger station. Rowan had seen the building once, months ago, while hiking the perimeter to learn the terrain. A squat structure of weathered timber and stone, half swallowed by pines, abandoned. After the Forest Service consolidated its posts years earlier, it wasn't marked on recent maps. People didn't go there unless they had a reason. Mako had a reason. Rowan pulled on his outer layer, checked the radio, then followed without argument. He had learned the difference between curiosity and signal. This was the latter. The path was faint but intentional. Snow thinned where the trees grew closer together, needles breaking the white into dark, uneven scars. As they approached the station, Mako slowed, tail lowering slightly, not fear, but caution. The building emerged from the trees like something left behind on purpose. Its windows were boarded, the wood bleached and split by years of weather. The roof sagged slightly on one side. The sign, Forest Service, hung crooked, one rusted bolt keeping it from falling completely. But the door had been opened recently. Rowan felt the familiar tightening behind his eyes. Not adrenaline, memory. Inside, the air smelled wrong. Not rot, not dust. Metal, plastic. A faint trace of ozone, like spent batteries. The interior was small. One main room, a side office, and a narrow storage closet that once housed weather instruments. Cobwebs clung to the corners, but the floor bore scuffs that didn't match age. Footprints, partially swept away. Mako moved methodically, circling the room once before stopping at the far wall. He sat. Rowan followed his gaze. A shelf had been disturbed. Beneath it, a weatherproof cabinet hung open by a few inches. Rowan crouched, easing it fully open. Inside were things that didn't belong to an abandoned ranger station. A bundle of spare batteries, electrical tape, a coiled length of thin wire. And at the back, taped beneath the shelf, a micro SD card sealed in plastic. Beside it lay a small spiral notebook. The cover was stained, the pages inside filled with blocky handwriting and strings of numbers. Not encryption, just substitution. Simple, portable, enough to keep information useless if found accidentally. Rowan exhaled slowly. This wasn't random. This was staging. Behind him, Mako froze. The dog's ears snapped forward, his body going rigid as his nose lifted toward a coat hanging from a nail near the door. It was old, brown canvas, frayed at the cuffs, but it carried a sharp chemical note that cut through the cold air. Mako let out a low sound from deep in his chest. Not a growl. something tighter. Memory surfacing through instinct. Rowan recognized it instantly. "Fire," he said under his breath. The coat smelled of solvent and accelerant, faint but unmistakable. Rowan's mind supplied the rest. Heat, smoke, chaos. He glanced at Mako, whose pupils had dilated, chest rising faster now. Mako had been trained for disaster response before Rowan ever met him. Fires, collapses, places where oxygen vanished and people panicked. Rowan didn't know the details. Handlers rarely did, but he knew enough to understand that certain scents weren't just information. They were echoes. He removed the coat from the nail and dropped it outside into the snow. Mako's breathing steadied, though his gaze remained fixed on the doorway long after. Back at the cabin, Lorraine listened as Rowan laid the micro SD and notebook on the table. Her face changed the moment she saw them. Not fear, recognition. "I kept the original," she said quietly. Rowan didn't interrupt. "The appendix," she continued, "about the aquifer routes. They rewrote the summaries, but the appendix stayed the same. They couldn't change it without triggering a review." She met Rowan's eyes. "If that data surfaces, Ashcroft Utilities loses its leverage, land, permits, everything." Rowan sat back slowly. Mako moved to Lorraine's side, resting his head briefly against her knee. She placed a hand on his fur, fingers trembling just slightly. Rowan did not plug the micro SD into anything. He had seen what curiosity did when it mistook itself for control. Instead, he drove into town. Juniper Lane's studio was tucked between a closed diner and a hardware store that survived mostly on seasonal traffic. The sign above the door read, "Lane Frequency," hand-painted, letters uneven but deliberate. Juniper answered the door herself. She was 36, tall and spare, with dark hair pulled back into a low knot that kept it out of her eyes. Her skin was olive-toned, weathered more by long nights than sun. She wore a thick sweater, sleeves pushed up, ink smudges on her fingers. Her gaze sharpened when it landed on Rowan. Not suspicion, but assessment. "You look like trouble," she said. "The quiet kind." Rowan handed her the micro SD. "I don't want to open it." Juniper's expression shifted. She gestured him inside without another word. Her studio was cramped but alive. Maps on the walls, notes taped in clusters, a weather radar looping silently on one screen. This wasn't a hobby. It was a last stand. Juniper listened as Rowan spoke. He didn't embellish. He didn't editorialize. He just laid out the facts. When he finished, she leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes for a moment. "They'll push back," she said. "Hard." "I know," Rowan replied. She nodded. "If this is real, and I think it is, this isn't just lending abuse. It's infrastructure theft." She looked at the micro SD again, then at Rowan. "Once this goes public, it doesn't go quiet again." As if on cue, Mako, who had been lying near the door, rose and walked to the studio window. He stopped, staring at the glass. Outside, a delivery truck idled across the street longer than necessary, engine running, driver unmoving. Mako's reflection stared back at Rowan in the glass, eyes alert, body coiled. Juniper followed his gaze and went still. "They're already watching," she said softly. Rowan returned to the cabin before dusk. The fire burned low. Lorraine sat at the table, the light catching the fine lines in her face. She looked smaller now, but steadier. "Did you give it to her?" she asked. "Yes." Lorraine nodded once. Then it started. Rowan looked at Mako, who had resumed his place by the door, watchful as ever. The truth had weight now, and weight always came with a cost. The power went out without warning. One moment the cabin hummed with its low, steady rhythm, the faint click of the heater cycling, the amber glow of the single lamp over the table. And the next, silence fell like a dropped blanket. Not a flicker, not a surge, a clean cut. Rowan felt it before he confirmed it. The way the air changed, the way sound widened when the background noise vanished. Outside, The wind rose in a sharp, deliberate gust, driving snow hard against the walls. The temperature dropped fast enough to be felt on the skin, as if the mountain itself had inhaled. Lorraine looked up from the chair by the stove, her eyes searching the room. "Is that—" "Intentional," Rowan said. He moved immediately. Lanterns came out. Oil wicks adjusted with practiced hands. He checked the stove damper, fed it 2 split logs, and placed a kettle close enough to catch radiant heat without boiling. His voice stayed even as he spoke, the way it did when instructions mattered. "We conserve movement," he said. "We keep layers dry, no sweating." Lorraine nodded, absorbing the cadence. She had lived long enough to recognize competence when it showed up quietly. Marco pressed close to her knee, his body angled outward. The German shepherd's coat bristled slightly where the wind found its way through the seams of the cabin. His ears stayed upright, tracking the storm and something else. Rowan circled the interior once, checking windows, seals, the back door. All secure. Too secure, he thought. Sabotage didn't announce itself with broken locks. It relied on plausibility. A gust slammed into the cabin's western side, rattling the woodpile stacked outside the shed. Mako rose at once. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He went still, head turning toward the woodpile as if something had spoken in a language only he understood. Rowan followed his line of sight and pulled on his coat. "I'll be quick," he told Lorraine. Outside, the storm hit him like a wall. Snow stung his face, driven sideways by the wind. He moved low, boots finding purchase by habit, one hand braced against the cabin as he edged toward the shed. Marco stayed close, matching pace despite the gusts. His nose cut through the air, tracking something beneath the storm's noise. The woodpile sat undisturbed at a glance. Split logs stacked neatly, snow settling between them. Too neatly. Rowan crouched and brushed snow aside. There it was, a compact device wedged between 2 logs, wrapped in dull casing, wires tucked tight. Not an explosive, something subtler, a heating element, timed to fail, enough to start a smolder, then a flame, enough to look like carelessness, an accident. Rowan's jaw tightened. He reached in, careful, fingers numbing fast. As he worked the device free, a gust tore through the pile, shifting a log. Metal scraped. Mako yelped once, short, sharp, and recoiled. Rowan turned in time to see the dog's left foreleg catch against a jagged edge of frozen metal. Blood darkened the snow immediately, startling in its brightness. "Mako!" Rowan said, dropping the device and kneeling. The dog shook once, then tried to plant the injured paw again, teeth clenched, body trembling with more than cold. Rowan pressed a gloved hand against the wound, checking depth. Not deep, not catastrophic, but painful. And the cold would make it worse. Rowan lifted Mako's leg gently, wrapped it tight with cloth torn from his sleeve, and carried him back inside. Lorraine was on her feet when they came in, fear breaking through her composure at the sight of blood. Rowan set Mako down near the stove, keeping his voice steady as he worked. "Pressure," he said, more to himself than her. "We'll clean it when the bleeding slows." Mako's breathing came fast now, body shuddering despite the heat. He tried to rise, failed, then tried again, stubborn as ever. "Stay," Rowan said softly, pressing a hand to his shoulder. For a moment, the dog's amber eyes met his, not pain, not fear, apology. Rowan swallowed hard. As Rowan tightened the wrap, the lantern light flickered, once, twice, then steadied. In that brief pulse of shadow, Rowan caught his own reflection in the window. A man kneeling beside a wounded dog, snow and blood at his boots, holding a line he hadn't meant to draw. The realization struck him with quiet force. Someone out there had planned this night to end differently. When the bleeding stopped, Rowan sat back on his heels, exhaustion settling into his bones. Mako lay still now, breathing slower, eyes half-lidded but alert. Lorraine watched them both, her face pale in the lantern light. "You can still walk away," she said gently. "Take me to the shelters in town. Say you found me too late to do anything else. Rowan leaned against the table, staring at the floor. The option sat there, heavy and tempting. Turn this over to systems designed to absorb damage. Let paperwork replace responsibility. Mako shifted, then pushed himself upright with a low grunt. He tested his injured leg, winced, and then, stubborn as gravity, he stood, limping but standing. He moved to the door and positioned himself there, body angled outward, ears forward. The posture was unmistakable, on watch. Rowan closed his eyes briefly. If he left, the line disappeared, the cabin, the boundary, the small, fragile space where truth hadn't yet been smothered by procedure. He crossed the room and knelt beside Mako again, resting his forehead briefly against the dog's broad skull. "All right," he murmured. "We stay." Outside, the storm howled harder, as if in answer. Inside, the fire held. The decision to return to Lorraine's old house was not spoken aloud. It settled between them the way certain truths did, quietly, with weight. Rowan drove. Juniper sat in the passenger seat, shoulders squared beneath a dark wool coat that looked borrowed rather than chosen. Her jaw was set, eyes tracking the road ahead as if committing every turn to memory. In the back, Mako lay carefully on his side, injured leg wrapped and tucked close to his body. Despite the pain, his ears shifted constantly, reading the world through vibration and scent. They met Caleb Hart at the edge of town. Caleb was 33, tall but lean, built for long miles rather than force. His ranger uniform was worn soft at the seams. The green faded where sun and weather had claimed it over years of patrols. He had a narrow face, sharp cheekbones, and a beard that grew in unevenly, as if he trimmed it more out of habit than care. His eyes were alert in a restrained way, the look of someone who had learned to see things and say nothing about them. "I can't stay long," he said, voice low. "And I was never here." Rowan nodded. That was enough. Lorraine's house stood at the edge of a residential road that had never quite finished becoming a neighborhood. The yard was small, fenced with cedar rails that had grayed with age. Snow sat untouched on the porch steps, thin but deliberate, as if even the weather had been instructed not to linger. Inside, the air was stale but intimate, a life interrupted. Family photographs lined a narrow shelf near the entryway. Holidays, graduations, moments caught mid-laughter. A sewing machine sat by the window, fabric still threaded, the needle frozen halfway through a pattern that would never be finished. A pill organizer rested on the kitchen table, days of the week neatly labeled, routine preserved in plastic. Juniper paused at the photos, fingers hovering just above the glass. "They didn't even clear it," she murmured. "That's not how emergency seizures work," Caleb said quietly. "They take people out fast. Leave the rest." Mako moved ahead of them without prompting. His gait was careful but determined, nose low, tail still. He stopped at the basement door and looked back once, waiting. Rowan opened it. The stairs creaked beneath their weight, the sound amplified in the narrow space. Halfway down, the smell hit them, sharp, chemical, unmistakable. Gasoline layered with something sweeter and more dangerous. Mako let out a low sound, not fear, not aggression. Warning. The basement was larger than expected, its concrete walls scarred with age. New boards had been nailed hastily along one side, mismatched wood cutting across the older structure. Caleb knelt, running a hand along the seams. "This wasn't here before," he said. "I'd remember." Rowan pried the boards loose. Behind them lay a cramped storage space stacked with folders, binders, and rolled maps secured with twine. Labels had been crossed out and rewritten, dates amended, signatures duplicated. Juniper's breath caught. This is it. She pulled out a binder, flipping through pages with practiced speed. Foreclosure notices, forced transfers, adjustments logged after the fact. Beneath it all, maps, hand-drawn overlays marking underground water routes, parcels circled in red. Land grabs tied to infrastructure, Caleb said. If they control the water, they control the town. Footsteps sounded above them, measured, unhurried. Brennan Sloane's voice drifted down the stairs, calm as ever. I was hoping we could talk. Brennan stood at the top of the basement steps, hands visible, posture relaxed. His coat was immaculate, beard trimmed close along his jaw. Two men flanked him, broader, quieter, their faces set into neutrality. No threats, Brennan continued, just clarification. You're trespassing. Rowan felt Mako shift beside him, body angling forward despite the injury. Juniper closed the
binder slowly. You should leave. Brennan smiled. We will. But documents have a way of complicating things. Possession, intent, very messy. Caleb met Rowan's eyes. The message was clear. Now. They moved as one. Caleb led them through a narrow opening behind the storage space, concealed by a hanging tarp. Cold air rushed in as they emerged into a low tunnel, an old storm runoff conduit, half flooded, barely wide enough to crouch. They ran. Water soaked their boots. The tunnel curved sharply, light vanishing behind them. Juniper slipped on the slick concrete, hitting the ground hard. The binders skidded from her grasp, papers fanning into the dark. Rowan turned back without hesitation. He hauled Juniper up by the arm, ignoring the shout behind them, ignoring the weight of what lay scattered at his feet. Mako limped past, stopping only once to look back, ears flat, urging them on. They burst out near the creek, breath ragged, hands numb. The house loomed behind them, silent again, as if nothing had happened. They had escaped, but not cleanly. Back at the cabin, Juniper spread what they'd saved across the table. Enough. Not all. Proof of pattern, she said, but not the full scope. Caleb leaned against the wall, exhaustion etched into his posture. They'll know you were there. Rowan nodded. He already felt the shift in the air. Mako lay near the fire, injured legs stretched out, eyes open and watchful. He lifted his head when Rowan looked at him, tail thumping once, steady, present. As night settled, a single vehicle passed the cabin road, slow, deliberate. Mako's head followed the sound until it faded. Rowan watched the shadows stretch across the snow and understood something new. The ground itself remembered who had walked on it, and tonight it was not done speaking. They had truth now, just not enough to end the lie. The town hall filled slowly, not with urgency, but with habit. People arrived in heavy coats dusted with snow, boots thudding against old wood floors polished thin by decades of meetings that promised more than they delivered. The air smelled of damp wool and stale coffee. Conversations stayed low, careful, neighbors speaking like witnesses instead of friends. Juniper Lane stood near the small stage, microphone resting against her hip. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, she looked more tired than usual. The dark circles beneath her eyes were deeper, her posture rigid with the effort of staying upright rather than leaving. She wore a charcoal sweater and black jeans, simple, deliberate, nothing that would distract from her voice. When she stepped forward, the room quieted. "This isn't an accusation," she began. "It's a safety briefing." Her voice carried easily, trained by years of speaking into static and silence. She framed it carefully. Winter infrastructure. Power, stability, emergency preparedness. No names, no blame, just questions that had been avoided for too long. Rowan stood near the back wall, hands loosely folded, weight evenly balanced. Mako lay at his feet, injured leg tucked beneath him, eyes half closed. To anyone else, the dog looked calm, resting. Rowan knew better. Caleb Hart followed Juniper to the stage. Out of uniform tonight, Caleb wore a plain jacket and jeans, his ranger badge clipped to his belt rather than displayed. His beard had grown thicker since Rowan last saw him, darkening the sharp lines of his face. He looked uncomfortable in front of people, shoulders tight, but his eyes were steady. "I've monitored infrastructure incidents in this valley for 7 years," Caleb said. "This winter, Power outages, line failures, and emergency shutoffs increased by 43%. A murmur rippled through the room. Caleb clicked a remote. The screen behind him lit up with a timeline, dates, locations, outages, marked in red. Patterns emerged even for those who didn't want to see them. Several incidents coincide with unauthorized devices found near substations, sheds, and private properties, he continued, including areas near homes under recent emergency seizure. The room shifted. People leaned forward. That was when Victor Holden stood. He didn't rush. He rose as if he belonged there, which in many ways he did. Victor was 55, tall, broad-shouldered in a way softened by age rather than dulled by it. His hair was silver at the temples, combed back neatly. He wore a tailored navy coat over a gray scarf, leather gloves folded in one hand. His face carried the practiced calm of someone used to being listened to, a benefactor, a sponsor, a man whose name appeared on plaques. "Let's not turn concern into panic," Victor said smoothly. "Ashcroft Utilities has kept this town warm for decades." Rowan felt Mako's body tense. The dog rose slowly, silently, and pressed himself against Rowan's leg. His nose lifted, barely perceptible, then angled toward Victor. His ears flattened. Not fear. Recognition. Rowan inhaled once. Shallow. Accelerant. Faint. Almost masked by cologne and wool. Victor smiled at the crowd. "We'll conduct a review, but misinformation spreads faster than cold." Juniper met his gaze. "Transparency prevents panic," she replied. Victor nodded politely and sat. The meeting adjourned without applause. Outside, the night had settled thick and quiet, snow absorbing sound. Rowan leaned down, hand brushing Mako's neck. "You caught it too," he murmured. Caleb stepped beside them. "I smelled it," he said. "Didn't trust myself." Rowan looked toward the maintenance corridor beyond the hall. "Let's check the depot." They moved quickly without drawing attention. The maintenance shed sat near the old tunnel access, a low concrete structure half buried into the hillside. Its lights were off, too off. Mako reached the door first and stopped, body rigid. His tail was still. His breathing slowed to a measured cadence Rowan recognized from another life. Inside, the air was heavy with fuel. Pallets lined the far wall. Wood darkened, soaked through. Stacked beside them were metal drums, lids cracked just enough to vent. Paper lay boxed nearby, edges curling from chemical exposure. Records, enough to burn, enough to disappear. Rowan pulled his radio. "Caleb." Before he could speak further, footsteps sounded outside. Victor Holden stepped into the doorway, hands visible, expression unchanged. "I was hoping we could avoid misunderstandings," he said. Mako growled, low, controlled, final. Sirens cut through the night moments later, lights flashing against the snow. Victor's composure fractured, just slightly. He turned too late. Caleb moved first, voice clear, badge finally visible. "Victor Holden, you're under arrest." Victor's shoulders sagged, not with shock, with calculation giving way to inevitability. As officers secured the scene, Rowan stood back, hand resting on Mako's shoulder. The dog leaned into the contact, steady again. As Victor was led past, his gaze locked briefly with Rowan's. There was no hatred there, only something colder. Appraisal, as if measuring how close he'd come to erasing a truth that refused to stay buried. By morning, Ashcroft Utilities offices were sealed. Notices went up. Phones rang unanswered. The town woke to headlines that didn't shout, but didn't whisper either. Lorraine watched the news from the cabin, hands wrapped around a mug, eyes wet but sharp. "I didn't think I'd live to see it," she said. Rowan looked down at Mako, sleeping now, finally resting. Instinct hadn't saved the town, but it had saved the moment when truth still mattered, and sometimes that was enough. The crisis did not end with sirens or headlines. It thinned the way storms did when the wind finally spent itself. Lorraine's house was no longer scheduled for immediate seizure. The notice arrived folded once, then folded again, as if it wanted to take up less space than it deserved. A temporary injunction. A pause. Not justice yet, but breathing room. the kind that allowed a person to stand without shaking. Rowan read it twice, then set it down on the table without comment. He had learned to recognize provisional victories. They came with strings. The cost arrived quietly. The call from his unit came first. No raised voices, no pressure, just options framed as questions. Rotation windows, fitness assessments, a path back if he wanted it. Rowan listened, eyes on the cabin door as snow drifted past the glass. "I'm staying," he said finally. There was a pause on the other end, then acceptance, clipped and professional. The door closed gently behind the decision. Juniper's loss followed. Her old station dropped her without ceremony. Restructuring, they called it. She didn't argue. She loaded her equipment into a battered white box truck instead, antennas lashed to the roof, cables snaking through a cracked side window. The truck smelled of solder and coffee and stubbornness. When she parked near the cabin for the first time, she laughed softly. "I always thought exile would be louder." Caleb's reassignment came next. A transfer order slid across a desk he hadn't asked to sit at. Another district, another forest. He packed his things with the same restraint he brought to patrol, neat, deliberate. When he stopped by to say goodbye, he didn't linger. "Truth has a long memory," he told Rowan, gripping his forearm once. "So does the land." Lorraine's turn came last and hardest. She stood at the town hall again, not behind anyone this time. She wore a simple wool coat and a scarf she had knitted herself, the ikastaya. Stitches uneven but steady. Her hair was pulled back, silver strands catching the light. Her hands trembled when she signed the statement, then steadied as she lifted her head. Her voice did not waver. She spoke of appendices and water routes, of signatures duplicated after consent, of nights when fear masqueraded as procedure. She spoke until the room grew quiet enough to hear breath. When she finished, she did not look at Rowan. She didn't need to. After that, people began to come to the cabin. At first, it was practical: power outages, road closures, sudden storms that made the mountain impassable. Rowan opened the door without ceremony. Blankets appeared, soup simmered, a rhythm formed. The cabin became a place that did not ask questions before offering warmth. Rowan repaired the locks, not because he expected trouble, but because habits endured. He replaced weather stripping, checked hinges, made small improvements the way he always had, methodical, precise. Only now, his shoulders didn't stay tight while he worked. One evening, a woman named Sarah arrived with her teenage son. Sarah was tall and narrow-shouldered, hair the color of wet sand pulled into a messy braid. Her face held the exhaustion of someone who had learned to carry more than she showed. She thanked Rowan twice and apologized once too many times. Her son said nothing, eyes fixed on Mako with open awe. Mako watched them enter, tail giving a single, measured sweep. He accepted a cautious hand on his shoulder, then settled again near the fire. The night softened. Snow fell lighter now, the mountain less hostile, more patient. Lorraine took to knitting by the hearth, fingers moving with renewed confidence. She hummed sometimes, tunes Rowan didn't recognize but felt familiar anyway. Rowan fixed a latch one night and realized his breathing had slowed without instruction. Near midnight, long after the cabin had settled, Mako lifted his head and looked toward the door. Not alert, not guarding. He simply watched, then rested his chin on Rowan's knee, weight full and trusting. Rowan stilled, struck by the quiet certainty of it, the sense that vigilance had, for once, been allowed to sleep. In the morning, Juniper broadcast from the truck, her voice cutting through static and snow. She spoke about preparedness, about neighbors, about the difference between safety and silence. People listened, not everyone, but enough. Lorraine received letters, some supportive, some sharp. She read them all, folded them neatly, and placed them in a box beneath the table. She no longer asked Rowan what he thought. She knew. On the final night of the season's worst cold, the cabin glowed amber against the snow. Rowan checked the stove one last time, then sat back, hands resting loosely on his thighs. The habit remained. The tension did not. Mako lay at his feet, injured leg healed to a faint stiffness that would never quite leave. His breathing was slow now, even, deep, real. Rowan rested his palm on the dog's head, fingers sinking into thick fur. Outside, the wind passed without challenge. Inside, the line held, not by force, not by vigilance alone, but by presence. Destiny had not arrived with thunder. It had arrived quietly on four paws and stayed because someone chose not to turn away. Miracles do not always arrive with thunder or signs written in the sky. Sometimes they come quietly, through instinct, through conscience, through a moment when someone chooses to stay instead of turning away. If God can guide a loyal dog to sense danger before it is seen, He can also guide the human heart to recognize what is right before it is easy. In everyday life, most of us will never face a blizzard on a mountain or a hidden injustice behind locked doors. But we all face smaller moments of choice, whether to speak or stay silent, whether to help or look away, whether to stand with someone when it costs us comfort. Faith often works through ordinary people doing one brave thing at the right time. If this story spoke to you, share it with someone who may need encouragement today. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from and what this story reminded you of in your own life. Subscribe to K9 Navy SEAL Legends for more stories of courage, loyalty, and quiet faith.
May God bless you and keep you. May He bring warmth to your home, clarity to your decisions, strength to your heart, and protection to you and those you love.